All right, today we are digging into this really fascinating and honestly pretty provocative 2026 study. It makes a super bold case for bringing back something that used to be a common part of public life, the civil Sabbath.
And listen, the authors do not mince words here. They frame the whole issue in the highest possible terms. They actually argue that a government allowing businesses to open on Sunday is committing an act of tyranny. I mean, that is a huge challenge to the modern way we think about the separation of business and belief.
So, you're probably asking, how in the world do they get to that conclusion? Well, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll look at what they call a divine duty, then we'll explore the theological case they build. After that, we'll get into the political path they propose, unpack their justification for that wild act of tyranny claim, and finally, see how they want to move this from theory into action.
Okay, let's jump into their main argument. Now, this study, which was co-authored by scholar Stephen Wolfe and a couple of Presbyterian pastors, isn't just some academic paper. Nope, it's built on a really foundational belief about what government is even for. And this right here gets to the absolute core of it. The authors are saying that civil leaders have a duty, a binding duty, to promote what they see as true religion. So from their point of view, enforcing Sunday closing laws isn't just a nice idea. They literally call it a moral necessity.
So how do they back this up from a theological perspective? Well, here's the thing. They argue this isn't some brand new radical idea. They say it's actually about recovering a Christian position that was held for a very long time.
And the key concept you have to understand is what's called the first table of the law. You know, a lot of us think of the Ten Commandments as purely personal rules for our own lives, but this study argues that the first four commandments, the ones about duties directly to God, like honoring the Sabbath, they actually have a civil component that the government is supposed to uphold.
To support this, they're not just pulling it out of thin air. They lean heavily on historical precedent. They're citing these foundational documents like the Westminster Confession and pointing to a whole history of American Presbyterians who argued for the civil enforcement of the Sabbath. So in effect, what they're saying is, hey, we're just getting back to our roots here.
And they frame their case with this really powerful claim. By arguing that it's the refusal to support these laws that is the real break from tradition, they position their whole argument not as radical, but as a simple return to orthodoxy. It's a clever move.
Okay, so you've got the theology down, but how do you turn that into a practical strategy? I mean, if your goal is to pass these laws in a modern, pluralistic society, how do you actually get it done? Their answer here, well, it might surprise you.
Right, because the common assumption, even for a lot of Christians, is that you can't really legislate morality. The thinking usually goes that you need a massive spiritual awakening in the culture before society would ever accept laws like these. Well, the authors of this study look at that idea and say, nope.
And this is where their strategy gets really, really interesting. Instead of waiting for some big spiritual revival, the study argues all you really need is majority assent. They believe a simple majority vote, even if it comes from citizens who aren't particularly devout, is all the justification you need to pass these laws. The idea is that the law itself can then start to shape people's behavior.
And they are crystal clear about this. This quote from the study says it all. By decoupling political action from spiritual revival, they're essentially creating a lane for immediate political action without having to wait for hearts and minds to change first.
So what happens if a government doesn't enforce the Sabbath? This is where the argument gets, well, really dramatic. They frame inaction not just as a policy failure, but as a fundamental breakdown of what it means to govern at all. And there it is. The study, citing the famous 19th century theologian Charles Hodge, claims that a government that fails to uphold the Sabbath is committing an act of tyranny so bad that it could actually justify rebellion. This just raises the stakes from a political debate to a question of ultimate allegiance.
So how on earth do they get to such an extreme conclusion? Well, they lay out this logical chain. It goes like this. Free institutions need good order. Good order depends on morality. Morality is sustained by religion, and religion needs the Sabbath for instruction. So therefore, if you abolish the Sabbath, you're not just creating an inconvenience. In their view, you're launching a direct attack on the very foundations of society itself.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. What's the ultimate point of this study? And what does it mean for the political and religious conversations we're having today?
The most important takeaway is this. This is not just some theoretical, academic debate. The authors have laid out a theological justification and a political strategy that are specifically designed for immediate action. They're making a serious case for reshaping society right now based on these principles.
And all of this leaves us with the fundamental question this study forces us to confront, whether we agree with it or not. In a nation with so many different beliefs, where exactly is the line between religious freedom and civil law? This study gives one very forceful answer, and it's pushing that very question right to the front of public debate.